Well, I am absolutely delighted to say that joining me for the final Godcast interview of 2020 is somebody I know pretty well, but you may not know very well yourselves. It is the Right Reverend Philip North. And Philip North is the Bishop of Burnley. He looks like he's somewhere else today, but I think that's just a backdrop. Bishop Philip, welcome to the Godcast. How are you?
It's great to be with you. Thank you for having me. It's Holy Island in the background, but I can assure you I'm sitting safely in my house in Burnley.
Okay. Well, it's really great to have you on the Godcast, and we've had some great guests, and it's a great way to finish the year. Now, if anybody out there is expecting some deep theological kind of questions going on here, this is a very gentle, light-hearted discussion prior to Christmas. So, and it's for a very wide audience. So if it's not for you, then feel free to switch off. But Bishop, can I start with a question about you as a young chap? Where did you actually grow up?
North London.
Okay.
In Enfield, the borough of Enfield. I'm a London boy and an Arsenal fan.
Okay. And what was life like for you growing up? Was it a happy time?
Oh, it was up and down. It was slightly dull bit of London. There were things I loved, like sport and music. My mum and dad split up when I was about 8 or 9, like many people, so that's a bit difficult to handle. I think growing up is not much fun for anyone, is it? The fun begins when you grow up and become an adult, and then it has been fun since then. I think I've enjoyed my life for the most part since then.
Okay, was it a church family you were part of?
It wasn't. No, I mean, it was. It's a close family. I'm still very close to my sisters. I'm close to my parents. It was a very loving family. We weren't particularly taken to church, except for just enough to get places at the church school. But I found out one day that if you sang in the choir in the church, you got paid. And so I started going along to this choir for the cash. I went to church for the money, and that's all it was. I liked the singing, I liked the money, particularly at weddings. But then, when I was about 15, 16, a curate came to that parish. She was just brilliant with young people. And brilliant at communicating the faith and making sense of the Christian faith. Up until that, and then I thought it was a kind of moral code. It was just another way of managing my behavior. He helped us to see faith in terms of relationship with God and Jesus, relationship with each other, and in terms of our own preciousness, such that Jesus gives his life so that we can live with him forever. It was really through him that I came to mature faith.
Were you comfortable with that transition, or were you kind of resistant as a teenager?
What, to faith?
Yeah, to this kind of guy coming in and kind of changing your slant.
No, I wasn't resistant at all. You see, it's I think if you're brought up a Christian, you go through a period of rebellion and turning away from it all, and you have to recover for it yourself. If like me, I took myself to church. It was a kind of place of escape almost. It was my own territory. So in some ways, the rebellion was becoming a Christian, and it was not. It was a moment of beautiful revelation, really. And I think for anybody coming to faith, the next question you ask is, how does God want me to live my life? What's his call on my life? And so, in my late teenage years, thinking, well, how does God want me to use the gifts he's given me? That was, again, for me, that's been a liberating process, I think.
And at what age did you sense a calling? When did you feel some sort of calling?
I remember I was a very naughty boy at school. I was always in trouble. And I remember I was about 17, singing in the choir, and the history teacher who was sitting next to me singing turned around and saying, "I can see you being a vicar, North." And everybody just laughed. It was as if it was the funniest joke ever. But that kind of planted the seed on my mind, really. And then I really started exploring, properly after that. So 17, 18. Then I spent a year after I did a degree. I spent a year in a parish in Sunderland. Great big, huge estates parish on the edge of Sunderland, and I just saw a ministry like I'd never seen it before. I saw these priests absolutely on the streets, living and working with the people of that community, utterly bedded into the place, prayerful, Eucharistically focused, but absolutely there for the people and meeting need in the most immediate way and playing a big part. And it just blew me away to see, the church being and placing people in every community in the country who want nothing other than the goodwill of that community. To live life in that way struck me as very, very exciting. Were you a strong sense of call after the experience of ministry?
Were you fearful of that call at all, or because some people are, aren't they? Some people are kind of really like, I really don't want this to happen. What was your recollection of actually adapting to that sense of calling?
I was fearful of it not happening. You know, I couldn't, by the time I'd spent that time in Sunderland, I couldn't conceive of living my life in any other way. I mean, there's always, you know, you always ask deep questions about worthiness. You know, am I worthy to be the person who stands at the altar and makes Jesus present in bread and wine for the people? There's always questions like that, but of course you realize in the end that nobody is worthy of that. If you thought you were worthy, you'd be fundamentally unqualified for the calling. It's Jesus who makes us worthy. And I think the greatest fear was actually that I misread God's will and I wouldn't be a priest.
And your curacy, where was your curacy served, Bishop?
So I went back to the northeast. You know, I you know, from London, I went to the northeast originally to experience something different, and you know, just adored working on that estate in that year out. And I joined a group called the Company of Mission Priests, which is a dispersed community of priests who live to a rule and focus their ministry on areas characterized by high levels of deprivation. So I served as a curate back in Sunderland on some other estates on the edge of Sunderland, and then did an incumbency likewise in estates ministry in Hartlepool. So I spent the first 10 years of my ministry on those very similar, great, big, huge social housing estates on the edge of those northern towns.
And what were some of those big issues then? Was drugs as prevalent as they are now, or was it other things?
It was, what was the real issue when I first went there was unemployment. You know, I think, you know, we forget really those kind of massive unemployment times of the mid 90s. But you know, Westview Estate, it was 45% male unemployment on that estate. And with that, you know, goes a whole host of issues, particularly around maleness and being a man in those areas where you're not the breadwinner. The drugs wasn't a big issue. A big issue was bored young people getting drunk and roving the streets. You know, they were it was a dull place to grow up, I think, those estates. And you know, issues around debt and just kind of grinding long-term poverty, really, you know. But I think the thing was about those estates is that the problems are very real and very in your face, but the ministry was incredibly joyful. You know, those estates are close-knit communities where people grow up knowing each other. Easy places to get on if you're a priest. Actually, and easy places to develop a ministry to a community as opposed to a set of individuals, and an easy place also to bring about change. You're able to get projects going, we're able to grow the church, we're able to take over the secondary school and relaunch it as a church secondary school. So a number of things that could fly because of the nature of the place, which made it thrilling ministry. Okay, the problems that we were dealing with, like you today, of course, are very, very real and heartrending in many ways. But there's a real excitement to the kind of, you know, on the earth, incarnational, practical nature of the ministry there.
Yeah, quite a tough first gig, isn't it? But a fascinating place to kind of cut your teeth. Were you just were you overjoyed with excitement about being there, or did it come as a surprise actually how stark it was on the estates?
Oh no, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. You know, you every now and again things would really get you down. You know, you'd be dealing with a pastoral situation or a family, and it would really, well, it still happens to me today. You know, it just breaks your heart with compassion. That happened now and again, but at the same time, this was joyful ministry. You know, the lay people in the parish were a delight and supportive. There's a kind of gratitude that you get for Christian ministry on those estates. Sometimes you don't get in less deprived parishes where there's often a sense of entitlement. And I had lovely colleagues. You know, at one point in Hartlepool, I was 29, my curate was 25. These two guys, you know, in their 20s, just kind of going for it in terms of the ministry of that place, and you know, trying out new ideas and doing new stuff and trying to bring growth and life and trying to place the church, you know, at the centre of the community. I mean, one of the great things about the Church of England is we deploy people onto estates. I remember once going to a meeting of community leaders on that estate, 25 people around the table. At the end of the meeting, 24 of them went off home, back to their homes off the estate in other places, in other parts of the town. I was the only one who lived there and shopped there, and as well as working there. There's an embeddedness about Anglican ministry, which means we absorb places and understand them, and so can minister to them. You know, the Jesus who comes to share our life. That's the role of the priest, sharing the life of an estate or of a parish.
It's It's an extraordinary place. I've been there with, I think it was Thy Kingdom Come. I think it was meant to be on your group, but for reasons we won't go into, you didn't make it to that one. But and then you took us, when I was the curate, you took us on pilgrimage up to Durham, and you took us to Middlesbrough, to Sunderland, and to a lot of those places, and we ended up in the cathedral at Durham. Why do you? This is not on the question list, by the way, but why do you think some clergy, don't want to go to the northeast? Because I went for a BAP interview up there, and they said, well, we're always short of priests in the northeast, but the way you've just sold it, I would think it would be a great attraction to many priests.
There's a big issue, isn't there, about too many clergy in the kind of London, Oxford, Cambridge, southeast corner. Now, I did some calculations once, and Cambridge has 5 times more clergy than Blackpool. We've got a major national deployment problem where we focus our resources in the areas of wealth and privilege. I think in sometimes there is a fear amongst clergy about working in urban areas and areas they don't know about well, as if kind of, life is going to be impossibly hard and tough for their children. And I just have to say, you just need to try it out. It's just not like that. And, I'd encourage any priest to spend a spell of their ministry on estates or in the north, because if you're ordained young, you've got 40 years ministry and you need the variety. And work, there was nothing, those are the most rewarding years of my ministry in many ways, was working on those northeast estates.
So what dragged you down?
It's the most thrilling ministry. We've got this privilege.
Yeah.
Sorry.
What dragged you south then after your curacy? Was the part of you wanted to stay up there, or?
Yeah, I did. What dragged me south was 10 years in, I'd done 10 years on the estates, and I was running out of ideas. And I made mistakes. One of the mistakes I made was I didn't spend enough attention forming the lay leadership. And that's a big mistake. And anybody working on estates, focus on your lay leaders. I didn't do enough of that. And so too much was coming from me, and I could feel my energy levels running down. And then I got an offer to do something completely different, which is to work at a place called Walsingham, where there's a place of pilgrimage, the Shrine of Our Lady of Walsingham. And it's an interesting place because the pilgrims to Walsingham are almost exclusively from deprived urban communities, the big conurbations. So in some ways it was work with similar people, but in a very different setting, where people were coming for an experience of renewal and refreshment in the faith, coming to seek for healing and forgiveness and a fresh start. And it was doing something, running a big charity with 80 employees and so on. It was a very different sort of work. And I kind of needed that change, actually. It was good to be developing other skills, and it was good to be seeing the impact that pilgrimage has on people's lives. So it was sort of, remember the Monty Python line, and now for something completely different. I was ready for something completely different, and that's Walsingham was what it was. And then after that, I wanted to go back to the northeast, but up in the northeast, they were at that point laying off clergy. And so I got offered a job in London, in big estates around the back of the stations. So it was estates ministry, it was urban ministry, around the back of King's Cross and Euston and St Pancras stations, but such a different context. You cannot compare London in a city with northeast estates. But that was a big team ministry, and again, very, very exciting ministry. Yeah,
and I think what people find endearing about you, Bishop, is you don't worry about calling out the church when you feel that's necessary. And just talking on this theme of urban ministry, you do feel that some dioceses are sat on huge donations, don't you, or wealth, and that wealth should be distributed a bit more across the country, and particularly in the deprived areas. Is that right?
Oh, we have really shocking, disgraceful inequalities that we model within the Church of England. So if you look at historic assets, if you divide historic assets by population, the figure you get to in the Lincoln diocese is £89 per head. The figure you get to in the Liverpool diocese is 85 pence per head. And that translates itself into how much those dioceses can invest in priests, in stipendiary ministry. And it seems to me that there's just a straightforward justice issue, that we need to be pooling assets better and deploying clergy more fairly. I think it undermines our message to the nation when we want to speak to the nation about equality, when we're not modelling that in our own lives. It's part of a problem I think we have as Church of England. we can come across, I would say we are quite a middle-class church. We don't hear working class voices very well. Our presence is weak in estates and working class areas.
Yeah.
And that's a big problem in terms of our common life.
Do you think that argument's moved on at all? Do you think people are listening?
Yes, I do think people are listening. There's quite a lot of work going on it at the moment. You know, I think crisis is very difficult to live with, but it exaggerates problems in such a way that they can't be addressed. And the financial strain being put on the Northern Diocese by the coronavirus epidemic is forcing the National Church of England to sit up and take notice and ask some deep questions about resource allocation.
And just one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was the news report that went out recently that I was involved in, and it's had a huge effect. Just what do you feel about poverty in the UK when you see stories like that, Bishop? You know, what does it do to you?
I think the worrying thing, Alex, is that we've moved beyond poverty to destitution. When I was I was working in some of the most deprived communities in the Northeast, but we never had to give people food. You know, people could afford to feed themselves and they could afford to feed their children. What's happened in the last 10 years, since the austerity measures brought in after the financial crash, since arguably the poor have been made to pay the price for the mistakes of the rich, what we've seen then is a move from poverty to destitution. And Joseph Rowntree Foundation reckon now that 2 million people are living in destitution. That means they're 1 or 2 incidents away from a serious crisis. So your fridge goes, you can't feed your children. A child's shoes goes, you just can't make ends meet. And this is profoundly alarming. And it's happening almost in secret because many of those people don't have a voice. And I think what was so powerful about that news report is that it gave a voice to the voiceless. You know, we heard the voices the nation either doesn't hear or chooses to ignore. And the reaction to it has been completely extraordinary because people simply didn't know that that was going on in their country. The 5th largest economy in the nation, and we can't feed our own children. You know, that's the shocking truth that we're dealing with. Of course, what happens next is, you know, it's very clear some of the causes of that destitution. One is an unfair benefit system and waits for benefits. A massive one is injustices in the workplace, with the abuse of the 0 hours contract, with many people working hard but still unable to make ends meet. A particular problem for us here in Burnley is rapacious private landlords keeping property in a poor condition and charging as much as they can in rent. You know, we know the issues. Well, the question is, as we try and build our nation back, is there the will to address them?
Yeah, that's my concern. You know, I think what you've said about the poor, you know, being abandoned, I do think I hate to say it, but I actually think that is the case. I think they get the very, very worst of a very bad deal in many cases. Generally, in the main, people have been really, really positive to that. But some people have said that, well, you know, food banks and this, that, and the other, they're just kind of plastering over the cracks and the issues, and you know, it doesn't actually do anything in the long term except fill a hole. And some people have just said that we can never change it, you know. And I wonder if, you know, somewhere like Burnley has got potential to really transform its community, you know. You know, what the downside of that piece was, I think it showed Burnley in quite a sorry state of affairs, but it's actually, and I'm sure you will endorse this, it's a wonderful place. It's got many brilliant things, it's got beautiful countryside, it's got great parks. The people are just out of this world, but there's a lot of people falling through the cracks. Do you think we can get to a place where we can solve this?
You know, it's the loveliest place I've ever lived, Burnley. I think you know, it's those doom narratives don't really work. It's not the whole story by any means at all, but there are people who struggle massively. I think, you know, there are limits to the food bank model, because I think the risk is, you know, it is having to accept free food it's an embarrassment for many people. You know, what I'd love to see is people able to take control of their own lives. And it's interesting with some food banks moving towards a community grocer model, where people are able to choose what food they take and make a small donation for it. And actually, are able then to move into leadership in that kind of project. I think when this crisis is over, we need the food bank at the moment. When the crisis is over, I think we do need to be moving more into those models where people are empowered, through the provision of food. People find empowerment in their own lives, because that's surely where we want to be in the end. But there does need to be, we need community action on the ground from the voluntary sector with projects like yours and whatever it becomes. But also we do need to look at, what are the bigger issues going upstream? What is going wrong in the workplace? So people are working but can't make ends meet. Why are so many employers handing profit on to shareholders rather than to the employees who generate those profits in the first place? What is this fundamental brokenness in our economic structures? How can we have a benefit system which doesn't punish people by starving their children, which doesn't make them wait 5 weeks for benefits so they can't make ends meet? Yeah. There must be, I don't want people to be benefits dependent, but we do need a safety net. We do need a safety net that moves people back into taking power in their own lives. There are things we can do to fix this. This kind of poor will always be with you passivity will not do. There's no reason at all why the world's 5th largest economy should have anybody in poverty. We do not need people living in poverty in this country. And we certainly don't need the kind of destitution that you've highlighted.
Okay, thanks, Bishop. Just moving back to yourself. So you became the Bishop of Burnley. Was that difficult for you to accept that role, Bishop, or were you kind of excited about going that as you were about going to Sunderland?
No, it kind of happened to me. I still, I watch you on the telly and I see what other priests in Burnley are doing, and I feel a very profound sense of jealousy, because I feel, I think almost every bishop would say this, you feel a detachment from the heart of your calling. My calling came when I was working on those estates in Sunderland, and it's to be in the midst of God's people. And I feel a stage removed from this, especially in pandemic, when you spend most of your day peering into a screen. So there is a sense in which, I do wonder every day, is this what God wanted me to do? But there is, but being a bishop gives you an opportunity to bring about change. So it means you've got a voice that can be heard. It means that you can, you have an influence within the wider church, and it means that you can oversee ministry across a diocese to ensure that, church is being renewed, to ensure that we're present in areas of deprivation, to ensure that clergy are properly supported and cared for. So there's a difference. There are differences that you can make.
And are you content with how things are progressing in the diocese in Lancashire? Do you think we're moving in the right direction?
I think that, it's tough in pandemic, isn't it? Because lots of people, I think we were moving in the right direction. We were seeing, we've set a big challenge in this diocese. We said we're not going to cut clergy numbers. We're going to work on vocations. We're going to encourage people to be more generous so we can afford those clergy, and try not to cut back the infrastructure. And that was showing signs of working until pandemic hit. And now I think every church is thinking, how are we going to build back?
Yeah.
And that's really going to take the next 2 or 3 years, is to encourage the local church in recovering its fringe, in recovering its youth and its children's work. And in having said that, there's been amazing changes as well. Here we are live, recording this program. Who knows how many people will see it? We've learned how to put Christian content online. We've learned how to put worship online. We've learned, as again you've demonstrated, how to find a new fringe through our service. So there are great opportunities, but I think there will be a real need to kind of build back. And what I worry about there is clergy well-being and exhaustion, actually. Many of them have been working hammer and tong for 9 months, and they need a break.
Okay, and just as your role as a bishop, probably more than local clergy, of course I care about the wider world, but what are the big issues that grind your bones at the moment with the wider world? Is it the issue in the Holy Land, or what's going on in Azerbaijan? Is there a particular thing, is there a particular bee in your bonnet at the moment about world issues?
I've led huge numbers of, I worked at Walsingham. Walsingham was known as England's Nazareth. And so one year I took a pilgrimage from there of people to see Nazareth. Pilgrims to go to the real Nazareth in the Holy Land. And we met there some Palestinian Christians. And my eyes are really open to the plight of the people of Palestine and to the Palestinian church. that remains really deeply on my heart. You know, that sense of injustice that people have lost their land. You know, there's Palestinian Christians. There's more Palestinian Christians in Sydney, in Australia, than there are now in the Middle East. We're in danger of losing the indigenous church in Palestine, and that's an issue that is really, really on my heart. And you know, I pray for the peace of the Holy Land. I pray for a stable two-state solution in the Holy Land every night.
Yeah, I went to the Holy Land myself with my mate Chris in January, and you won't remember saying this, but you said, because I was in two minds about going, and you said you must go. It will change your ministry forever. And I think what you've just said there about the Palestinian issue is absolutely the same. We met some Palestinian Christians. Our guide was a Palestinian Christian, and he's left his mark indelibly on my mind and on my heart. And the situation out there is so challenging for people. And I was fortunate enough to speak to, you know, Nadim Nassar about the issue in Syria, and I spoke to George Galloway about the issue across the Middle East. It's a really broken part of the world, isn't it, at the moment? But do you think the Northern Ireland model is a good model for these people to work from?
I mean, the trouble is, the issue is at the moment that the settlements have gone so far that it's very hard to conceive of a viable, feasible Palestinian state. So, you know, that you can't have a viable Palestine on where the boundaries are now drawn.
No.
So it'll take a major kind of international effort. I feel pretty despairing about it, to be honest, really. And of course, so much of the economy of that part of the world is around tourism and the pilgrimage. Yeah. And whenever the pilgrimage stops and the economy struggles, there's the politics becomes ever more complicated.
Yeah. Thank you, Bishop. Just we're mindful of time. Just want to bring us back to the UK. It's been a torrid year for many people, and well, you've certainly lightened my afternoon with that Christmas jumper in one of my favourite places as a backdrop. Yeah. There, it's beautiful. But what have you made of this year? It's been extraordinary, hasn't it?
Oh, it's been. I think for you know, anyone born since the war, it's been the toughest year of our lives, hasn't it? Really. You know, sort of, you know, the what it's done to relationships, what it's highlighted in our country, what the implications in terms of the national debt that we're racking up. You know, it's really hard. And of course, you know, here we are talking just before Christmas. So, you know, my phone's going off the whole time from my sisters and my mum, trying to work out what we're going to do over Christmas with ever-changing guidance and advice. It's so hard for people. But I think we must think now, what sort of nation do we want to be after this? You know, we've got to think, how do we build back? I quite like the Joe Biden phrase, build back better. What does that mean, to build back better? What is it? What, you know, what have we seen in our nation? Because we've seen the very best and the very worst of human nature, haven't we? We've seen on the one hand, you know, communities coming together and tremendous patterns of generosity and mutual support and great patterns of volunteering and huge imagination and agility in organizations and companies and churches. But on the other hand, you know, the other bad side of it was shown by panic shopping, you know, sort of shutting the door, looking after me first. We've seen inequalities blown out of all proportion. We've seen children going to bed hungry. We've seen, you know, tensions in relationships because everything is magnified. We've seen the best and the worst, and I think that gives us a great chance to say, you know, what sort of country are we going to be next? How can we
build back better? That can certainly apply to the church as well. So, well, quite a lot of people who watch the Godcast would clearly say they're not Christians, they don't go to church. But what would your kind of, not Christmas message? I know that there'll be something on YouTube in the diocese, but what would your message be to people who kind of might watch this or listen to it on the podcast and think, you know, thought about church, quite like to go, and they just haven't made that step? For many people, it's a bit of a taboo thing, isn't it, to put a foot back in a church? What would you say to encourage them as we come towards Christmas time, Bishop?
I'd say this Christmas, look into the crib. You know, it's going to be hard to find a happy Christmas because so much is restricted. So look into the crib instead, and what will you see there? You'll see a human face. You'll see the face of a child, a face just like your own. Because what that tells us is that it's your life that God has come to share in Jesus, not someone else's life, your life. You know, he's come to be born like you, as you, in your shape and style and image. He's come to share in your life. This is about you. It's not some mythical fairy story. This is about you today. God is present with you and in your life. And because God is present with you and in your life, you can be present in God's life. Look into the crib, look at the child, and think, who is this baby? The baby who's come to bring love and hope and peace and joy into your life.
And if that's done it for them and they come to midnight mass for the Eucharist, what will they find there, Bishop?
They'll find, I pray they would find, a joyful, warm-hearted gathering of sinful people who get stuff wrong and get stuff right, but who will be home for them. And I hope that they'll hear words of scripture that inspire them. And I hope they'll feed on bread and wine that sustains them. And it may all be a bit weird at first. It probably will be. But, you know, stick with it. See what God is doing there. Because that's your home. You know, come home at Christmas. And see the child who welcomes you there.
I really echo that. It took me an age to get my foot in the church, and I did get it all wrong. I stood up in all the wrong places and sat down when I should be stood up and didn't know the hymns. But if you stick with it, it's a beautiful journey, and I would certainly endorse Bishop Philip's encouragement there. And just to kind of bring this to a close, you'll be reeling off a recent defeat by the Clarets to the minnows that are your team, Arsenal. Do you see relegation threatening this year?
Nah, we'll pull it round. We'll pull it round. We'll be back.
You went to Arsenal.
We got a point off Southampton yesterday. We'll be on the way up. We've hit rock bottom. I think the only way is up. Don't you worry. And you know, I'm always happy. You know, I don't like Arsenal losing, but if we're going to lose to anyone, then Burnley's the side to lose to, because this town is deeply proud of having a Premier League club. It's the only Premier League team in Lancashire, and long may that remain.
Absolutely. Here, Bishop. Here. And will you be in the north on Christmas Day, or will you be in the south?
I certainly will. Yeah. Yes. I shall be in Burnley here on Christmas Day. I'll be at St Cuthbert's, Burnley, so come and join us.
Or St Matthew's.
Or St Matthew's, yeah.
So thank you, Bishop, for your time. What would you like to just give the listeners a final message before we sign off?
I would indeed. I think in some ways my final message was that come and see the baby message. But you know, it's I do hope that what you've seen in this podcast and from Father Alex's ministry is what Christians do. I think we focus an awful lot on what Christians believe and the rationality or otherwise of that belief. Being a Christian is about belonging, and it's about serving, you know, but perhaps above all else, that's where it begins. And, you know, why does Alex serve the needs of people in Burnley? Because he has a saviour who comes to us as a human being and shows that all human life is precious. That's what we believe. Every human life is precious and beautiful and beloved. And that's why we serve. So come and join in. Thank you, Bishop. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who's joined the Godcast this year. We'll be back in the new year with Burnley legend Roger Eli, and go to thegodcast.co.uk to watch loads of interviews. But for now, Bishop Philip, thank you so much, and a happy Christmas. Thank you. Great to be with you all. God bless.